To the 12 tribes of Jacob's children, also known as Israel, scattered in all lands of the earth, in the name of our Creator Jehovah, I say greeting, and Jesus Christ of Nazareth, who rules the world, I bring you peace. We're going to look today at philosophy, modern science, ethics, morals, and where those things come from. This is the head of Plato, one of the Greek philosophers, and I'm reading from Who's Who in the Greek World, edited by Diana Bowder. So you will hear a lot of atheists and a lot of nations come up with their own sciences to try and say the Bible isn't real and Jesus Christ isn't real. But these are the Greeks, and some of them are mixed with the Romans. If you look in the book of Joshua and so on, where they became one nation. But they're Esau's children and Japheth's children, and they also have a perpetual debate or hatred for the children of Israel. Israel's children are more book-oriented, scribes chosen by the Most High to do his work on the earth. Children who oppose that, they have more of a philosophical, poetic, ethic, moral terms that they use. We use more Bible terms like faith and blessed and righteous terms. So some of the people who they will quote is philosophers such as Plato. And he was around 429 to 347 BC philosophers. So you saw Paul and so on tell you be careful of philosophers because they're not appointed by the Most High. A lot of them were people who took some of the teachings from the Jews. If you look at Josephus, he'll tell you that. And then mix it with paganism because the Greeks and the Romans were pagans. Alright, so Plato's philosophy is known mainly from his published dialogues, philosophical discussions in dramatic form, in which Socrates often plays a leading part. About 25 of the dialogues attributed to him are probably genuine. There also survive 13 letters, some or all of which may not be genuine, and the Apology, a reply placed in Socrates' mouth to the changes for which he was condemned to death. A common division of Plato's philosophy into three periods provide a good framework for an account of how his thought developed, though the changes were not abrupt. So you'll hear a lot of atheists, agnostics, unbelievers, antichrists. They quote philosophers a lot, and they talk about ethics and morals and things like that. The early dialogues are generally inconclusive. They were probably intended to leave the reader in perplexity about matters on which he had previously held unquestioned convictions. It is better to know one's ignorance than to be wrong. Typically, Socrates asks for a definition, usually of an ethical notion such as virtue, meno, courage, laches, or piety, euthifro. He does not want a list of virtues or virtuous acts, but an account of the being of virtue, what all virtues have in common that makes them virtues. Then, by a series of yes or no answer, he leads his interlocutor into self-contradiction. A question often raised is, can virtue be taught? Example in Meno, Protagoras. Okay? Consideration of this prompted Plato to argue that virtue is knowledge and hence can be taught, and that all wrong action is due to ignorance. But even on the teachability of virtue, the conclusions of early dialogues are not unanimous. So that's one of the Greek philosophers, okay? And let's see. So this is what the ancient Greeks, they looked like, you know. And if you want to know if the Bible is real, Daniel prophesied against the Greeks of them. Also Moses, and of course John the Revelator. They're in the book of the Maccabees, Philip of Macedon. So you can prove that these people are real and the countries are real. So why would the Greeks and the Romans be real, yet Christ not be real? You know what I mean? So this is just that's one of their historians. This is a philosopher, Zeno of City of Naples, Museo National. So we're going to talk about the philosophers today. And my book that I'm quoting from is Nelson's Quick Reference Bible Dictionary. And we're going to look at philosophy, okay? Philosophy, it is the object of the following article to give some account of that development of thought among the Jews which answered to the philosophy of the West. 2, the systematic progress of Greek philosophy as forming a complete whole. And 3, the contact of Christianity with philosophy. Okay. The philosophic discipline of the Jews. Philosophy, if we limit the word strictly to describe the free pursuit of knowledge, of which truth is the one complete end and is essentially of Western growth. In the East, the search after wisdom has always been connected with practice. The history of the Jews offers no exception to this remark. There is no Jewish philosophy properly so called. The method of Greece was to proceed from life to God. The method of Israel, so to speak, was to proceed from God to life. So we always have a God-centered nation, not a human-centered nation. That's just how Israelites are, which is why they always wonder why black people are so spiritual, this, that, and the other. It's in our physical makeup, okay? So the one led to the successive abandonment of the noblest domain of science, which man had claimed originally as his own, till it left bare systems of morality. The other, in the fullness of time, prepared many to welcome the Christ, the truth. The philosophy of the Jews, using the word in a large sense, is to be sought for rather in the progress of the national life than in special books. So we have a book that came down from the Creator. It's book of history, prophecy. The Hebrews have the only book of prophecy from beginning to end. We don't really believe in philosophy or philosophers. We have laws, statutes, commandments, and judgments. Okay. So the development of Greek philosophy, the various attempts which have been made to derive Western philosophy from Eastern sources have signally failed. However, Josephus covers that in a lot in his book, Josephus Against Appian, where the Greeks learned a lot of what they call philosophy from mixing what the Jews taught, because the Jews were men of learning and they had the Torah and the Bible, and that's where they got a lot of their philosophic thought, some of it mixed with pagan thought, okay? It is true that in some degree the character of the Greek speculation may have been influenced, at least in its earliest stages, by religious ideas which were originally introduced from the East. But this indirect influence does not affect the real originality of the Greek teaching. The very value of Greek teaching lies in the fact that it was, as far as is possible, the result of simple reason, or if faith asserts its prerogative, the distinction is sharply marked. Of the various classification of the Greek schools which have been proposed, the simplest and truest seems to be that which divides the history of philosophy into three great periods, the first reaching to the era of the Sophists, the next to the death of Aristotle, and the third to the Christian era. In the first period, the world objectively is the great center of inquiry, and the second, the ideas of things, truth, and being. In the third, the chief interest of philosophy falls back upon the practical conduct of life. After the Christian era, philosophy ceased to have any true vitality in Greece, but it made fresh efforts to meet the changed conditions of life at Alexandria and Rome. And if you bear in mind, the Jews of Alexandria was one of the largest contingents of Israelites, and they always be disputing with Paul and so on in the book of Acts. So the pre-Socratic schools, the first Greek philosophy was a little more than an attempt to follow out in thought the mythic cosmogonies of earlier poets. What is the one permanent element which underlines the changing forms of things? This was the primary inquiry to which the Ionic school endeavored to find an answer. Thales, circa 639 to 543 BC, pointed to moisture, water, as one of the source and supporter of life. Anaximenes, circa BC 520 to 480, substituted air for water. At a much later date, circa BC 450, Diogenes of Apollonia represented this elementary air as endowed with intelligence. 2. The Socratic schools. In the second period of Greek philosophy, the scene and subject were both changed, and philosophy of ideas, using the term in its widest sense, succeeded a philosophy of nature. In 3 generations, Greek speculation reached its greatest glory in the teaching of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So there are 2 things, he says, which may be rightly attributed to Socrates: inductive reasoning and general definition. By the first, he endeavored to discover the permanent element which underlies the changing forms of appearances and the varieties of opinion. By the second, he fixed the truth which he had thus gained. But beside this, Socrates rendered another service to truth. Ethics occupied in his investigations the primary place which had hitherto been held by physics. The great aim of this induction was to establish the sovereignty of virtue. So, that was it. When you see people talk a lot about ethics and morals, it comes out of Greek philosophy, not out of the scriptures. So a lot of atheists will point to that, but that doesn't supersede the scriptures, because they can't explain dreams, righteousness, walking on water, different forms of flesh. They have a lot of theories that are mixed with paganism and atheism. So, Christianity in contact with ancient philosophy. The only direct trace of the contact of Christianity with Western philosophy in the New Testament is the account of St. Paul's visit to Athens, Acts 17 verse 18, and there is nothing in the apostolic writings to show that it exercised any important influence upon the early church. 1 Corinthians 1 verse 22 to 24, but it was otherwise with Eastern speculation, which penetrated more deeply through the mass of the people, the philosophy against which the Colossians were warned, Colossians 2 verse 8, seems undoubtedly to have been of Eastern origin, containing elements similar to those which were afterward embodied in various shapes of Gnosticism, as a selfish asceticism and a superstitious reverence for angels. Colossians 2 verse 16 to 23, and in the epistles to Timothy addressed to Ephesus, in which city St. Paul anticipated the rise of false teaching. Acts 20 verse 30, 2 distinct forms of error may be traced in addition to Judaism, due more or less to the same influence. The writings of the sub-apostolic age, with the exception of the famous anecdote of Justin Martyr, throw a little light upon the relations of Christianity and philosophy. Christian philosophy may be in one sense a contradiction in terms, for Christianity confessedly derives its first principles from revelation and not from simple reason. But there is no less a true philosophy of Christianity which aims to show how completely these meet the instincts and aspirations of all ages. The exposition of such a philosophy would be the work of a modern Origen. And Origen, he was before a philosopher, before he became an apostle. And he has a lot of books written and disputing with the philosophers as well. So Paul talks about the Stoics and the Epicureans. And those were some of the philosophers. The Stoics and Epicureans, who are mentioned together in Acts 17 and 18, verse 18, represent the two opposite schools of practical philosophy which survived the fall of higher speculation in Greece. The Stoic school was founded by Zeno of Cittium around 280 BC and derived its name from the painted portico store at Athens in which he taught. Zeno was followed by Cleanthes around 260 BC, Cleanthes by Chrysippus around 240 BC, who was regarded as the intellectual founder of the Stoic system. They regarded God and the world as power and its manifestation, matter, being a passive ground in which dwells the divine energy. Their ethics were a protest against moral indifference and to live in harmony with nature, conformably with reason and the demands of universal good, and in the utmost indifference to pleasure, pain, and all external good or evil was their fundamental maxim. American Cyclopedia. The ethical system of the Stoics has been commonly supposed to have a close connection with Christian morality, but the morality of Stoicism is essentially based on pride, that of Christianity on humility. The one upholds individual independence, the other absolute faith in another. The one looks for consolation in the issue of fate, the other in providence, and providence is the Most High. The one is limited by periods of cosmical ruin, the other is consummated in a personal resurrection. Acts 17 verse 18. But in spite of the fundamental error of Stoicism, which lies in a supreme egotism, the teaching of this school gave a wide currency to the noble doctrines of the fatherhood of God, the common bonds of mankind, the sovereignty of the soul. Among their most prominent representatives were Zeno and Antipater of Tarsus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius. So a lot of the Hebrews were also into Grecian teachings, but they were able to tell the philosophers that the teachings of the scriptures will stand the test of time. Okay, so if it's from man, it fails, the teachings fail, and also if it's from the Most High, it does not fail. Okay, so the next one were the Epicureans. I think that Paul disputed with. They were also philosophers who the gospel had to preach to. So the Epicureans derived their name from Epicurus around 342 to 271 BC, a philosopher of Attic descent whose garden at Athens rivaled in popularity the Porch and the Academy. The doctrines of Epicurus found wide acceptance in Asia Minor and Alexandria, 95 to 50 BC. The object of Epicurus was to find in philosophy a practical guide to happiness. True pleasure and not absolute truth was the end at which he aimed. Experience and not reason, the test on which he relied. It is obvious that a system thus framed would degenerate by a natural descent into mere materialism, and in this form, Epicurism was a popular philosophy at the beginning of the Christian era. When St. Paul addressed Epicureans and Stoics, Acts 17 verse 18 at Athens, the philosophy of life was practically reduced to the teaching of these two antagonistic schools. So most of their teachings faded into memory when Christianity came about, and a lot of the philosophers also started preaching the gospel. Now today you find a lot of their teachings are making the rounds again in terms of antichrists, atheists, but this philosophy is not old. It's just a new form of teaching. Okay? It doesn't deal with prophecies like the scriptures comes from and from Revelation. So there you go. Whenever you hear people talking all about philosophy, psychology, psychiatry, and these modern science, even psychiatrists, psychologists, they don't know how to deal with demon possession. All of that stuff is treated with pills, when some of these things are spiritual warfare, because demons possess all kind of things. It has to do with some of it with witchcraft, idolatry. They don't really know how to deal with those things like the Bible teaches the children of Israel how to cure these kind of diseases and these mental problems, madness, and so on. Yeah, so anytime you hear about ethics, morals, philosophy, this, that, and the other, it's coming from the Greeks and the Romans, and they are descendants of Japheth, Edom, and you can see that their goal is to try to debunk the Gospels. If you look at Psalm 83, you see a lot of them in there listed as, come let us cut off Israel from being a nation. So they come with their own theories and their own man-made doctrines. So we always follow the Most High. We always follow the scriptures that was given by our forefathers through the Most High to us to teach our children in all generations. So Negroes, you need to teach your children who they are. They are the Israelites, the Hebrews of the Bible, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. Okay, so Ptolemy, he's there, king of Egypt, and of course you can read about Ptolemy in the book of the Maccabees, because that's when a lot of their prophecies were fulfilled, and the rest of it is in Revelation, the slave trade and so on, when they took the children of Israel in addition to the Ishmaelites. They took the children of Israel as slaves. And of course, you know that their symbol is the eagle. The Most High says a nation as swift as the eagle is going to come from far. And we're going to be sold to the Grecians. Well, that's what the Grecians look like. And the Romans, they're related to them. And a lot of them were poets, philosophers, idolaters. Their senators worship their Caesars. They worship their flags. And even to this day, you can listen to the United States national anthem, where it is dedicated to a flag or a standard, because that's what came down from their forefathers. So this is the head of Herodotus. You know, Herod, he was in the New Testament as well, and he sentenced the children of Israel, the boys under 2 years, to be killed because he couldn't find Christ. But nobody can kill you before your time, okay? Head of Homer, one of the so-called Apollonius of Tyana type, based on an original, and he was one of their poets, okay? Epic poet around 700 BC. So they were more poets, not prophets or anything like that, like the Hebrews were, okay? And the Parthenon at Athens, these things are still in existence. A lot of their idolatry was done in a lot of these things. And the temple of Apollo, you have Diana's temple. So they were really, really idolaters until Christianity came, and they saw the light in Christ, and they helped to spread the gospel worldwide. So even though today you still see a lot of the Sunday worship comes from pagan rituals, like with the Roman Catholic Church, they were the ones who spread a lot of that, and killed the saints who wanted to follow the laws, statutes, commandments, the ordinances, and keep the Sabbath and not eat pork. So you still see they still eat pork. They still have a lot of idolatry in the Roman Catholic Church. They still have the Sunday worship, which came from a lot of these that their forefather used to worship, you know. So there you go. Children live what they learn, but you don't have to be a pagan or remain a pagan even if your foreparents were pagans. Because Abraham's forefather, Terah, worshipped a lot of idols, but Abraham didn't continue to worship idols. He said, this don't make no sense. So he asked the Most High to reveal himself to him, and the Most High did, and made him a great nation. So Philip II, 382 to 336 BC, king of Macedon, father of Alexander the Great. The prophecies from Daniel's book and Esdras' book were fulfilled in the book of the Maccabees, in the Apocrypha, in the Hebrew Bible, in the 1611 edition. So that's how you can prove that the Christ is real, the Bible is real, and the prophecies are real, because they have not returned void yet. And with that I say shalom. So today we covered ethics, philosophers, poets, morals, and those things. A lot of it came out of Greek and Roman philosophy. It doesn't equal the scriptures. The Bible supersedes all books on the face of the earth, because the Bible is dictated by the Most High and the prophets of the Most High, and they reveal to mankind what's going to happen from the beginning of time to the end of time. And that's why we always use the Bible, as it is an original source. And with that I say shalom. Bye.